Ladies and gentlemen, in just a moment, we're going to begin the funeral services of Mrs. Marlene Rita Wein. I invite everyone to please rise and stand in place as the family enters the chapel. Please be seated. We welcome those of you who are joining us via live stream. The Kriya was cut earlier this afternoon. Officiating today is Rabbi Alex Friedman. As a gentle reminder, please be sure that all your phones have been set to the off mode, not to disturb the sacred funeral ceremony.
Today we gather to pay Kavod Acharon, final farewell, to Marlene Wein. And how do we begin to tell the story of an entire life? We don't have enough time here to sit and for each of us to share our stories, our memories, our recollections. But we can paint a picture, and we can remind us, those who were lucky enough to know her, about the very best of her. And for those who didn't know her, we can sketch and share why she meant so much to each of us. When we're not sure where to begin and how to start telling that life story, our people has always opened the Tanakh, scripture, and begun with those words of comfort and consolation. And so I begin with a selection from Kohelet, from Ecclesiastes, the Megillah, the scroll that is read on Sukkot in just a couple of days. Kohelet writes, K'chol zman ba'ed, v'chol chevetz tachat hashamayim. There's a season set for everything, a time for every experience under heaven, a time for planting, a time for reaping, a time for keeping and a time for discarding, a time for loving and a time for hating, a time for embracing and a time for refraining, a time for slaying and a time for healing, a time for laughing and a time for weeping, a time for dancing and a time for wailing, a time for birthing and a time for dying, a time for speaking and a time for silence, a time for seeking and a time for losing. And this moment, this day, this is the time to recall her at her best and to remember how many lives she touched. So many friends, too many to count, and a wonderful, innumerable family as well. And we give a hug as we can to her husband, Marvin, to her children, Stuart and Debbie Wein, Susie and David Bush, and Julie and Ken Fixler. To her grandchildren, Allie and Jeremy Swillinger, John and Chris Fixler, Eli and Marie-Louise Bush, Jessica Wein, Andy and Seth Frankenthal, Lauren and Brian, Nico, and Danielle Fixler. And her great-grandchildren, Rowan, Logan, Hank, Scout, Kaya, Ezra, and Daria. To her sister, Lois and John Mills, and the late David Reiff, and her sister-in-law of Helen, Siegel. In a moment, I'll recite the 23rd Psalm, and then we'll read this together in English. Mizmor LeDavid, Adonai Lo Yachzar, Bino Deshiyar B'Tzeini, Am Menucho Dinah Haleni, Nafshi Yeshaveh V'Yalchen B'Maglet Zedek V'Ma'an Shemo, Gam Kile Peges Amavet Lo Irava Kirtai Madi, Shivtecha Umishantecha Hema Yenachamuni, Ta'aroch Havanai Shulchan Neged Sorvai, Dishanta V'Shemen Roshi Kosi Rivaya, Ach tov v'chesed yudifuni kol yemei chayai, v'shavti b'veit Adonai le'orech yamim. I ask that you open your pamphlet to the second page, and we'll read this together, the 23rd Psalm. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yet though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Amen. At this time, we will hear loving tributes, memories, recollections, eulogies from those who knew her best and who loved her the most, those who were lucky enough to be her family. I invite her daughter Julie to speak first.
To know my mom was to love my mom. It didn't matter if you met her once or you knew her for a lifetime. She would always make you feel special and make you feel heard. I grew up in a home filled with so much love, laughter, and warmth. When you're little, you assume everyone's house is just like that. As I got older, I'd listen to the comments my friends would make about how lucky I was to have a special bond with my mom, and how fortunate I was to be able to share so much of my life with her, the good and the bad. It was just a given. My mom really, truly, completely was the kindest, most caring mom, most caring person. She was funny. She had a great sense of humor. She kind of had a spunkiness to her. But it was the combination of her and my dad that allowed me to grow up filled with values that I live with to this very day. Mom was an incredible teacher. She even taught my girlfriends how to play canasta. As good as she was at teaching, and no matter how many times she was offered her own classroom, she would always say no. She'd say, Dad comes first. My dad was in the retail business. He owned several children's clothing stores, and he often needed her help. Whenever there was a big sale, it was my mom who rounded up the troops to march into the stores and spend an entire day tagging every single solitary item in the store. I am sure they have a better way to do it now. When I say troops, I mean my Aunt Lois, my Grandma Sylvia, my Aunt Annette, any volunteer cousins, and I guarantee somebody here must have done that with us. What should have been the longest, most awful day filled with mundane tasks, it wasn't, because of her. Her love and respect for you, Dad, was special, and it never, ever, ever weaned until the day she died. She taught me to be the friend, the mom, and the grandma that I am today. She taught me to see the world with the glass half full. My mom used to just describe everything as wonderful. Kenny got such a kick out of that. It was almost a joke. He would call her after an event, after a dinner, after a party, and say, so Mom, was it really wonderful? She'd say, actually, Kenny, it was. It was wonderful. Family meant everything. I mean everything to my mom. When her generation got older, she passed along the responsibility of making sure our annual family Hanukkah party still occurred. She didn't care if it was just once a year gathering, She cared that at least once a year we saw family and reconnected with cousins that we may not have seen otherwise. My mom truly believed that family and friendships were sacred, and nothing should ever interfere with that. Who's right or who's wrong, it just didn't necessarily matter. But kindness, communication, and respect were integral in every relationship. Mom's oldest and dearest friends from when I was a baby are still her oldest and dearest friends. Aunt Helen and Aunt Joan, I don't know where you are, but you can attest to that. Her friends throughout the years, whether recent or not, she adored you all. She loved playing cards with you, and she loved spending time with you. Your love and your devotion meant everything to her, and I want you to know that before she passed, I shared every single one of your messages with her. I wanted her to know how much she was loved. One of the most beautiful things about my mom truly was her relationship with her sister Lois. The love and respect between them was something you could actually feel. It was palatable. It never, ever, ever wavered over the years, ever. In recent months, my mom and I would go to Aunt Lois's house and sit at the piano singing show tunes while Lois played. Sometimes we'd look through pictures or work on sticker books. The one constant was the joy, the laughter, and the silliness every time we were there. The last time we were there, the caregiver actually came into the room because she had never heard, there was so much laughter that she was like, what is going on in here? And it was really special. To say my mom loved her grandchildren and great-grandchildren is an understatement. She wanted to know everything, and I mean everything, they were doing and cared so deeply about every single one of you, every single day. In return, they cared so deeply for her. Their happiness was her happiness, and their sadness was hers as well. The day after my mom passed, Jonathan and Chris brought lunch to my dad's house for all of us. They were late, but I really couldn't get mad, because the reason they were late is because Jonathan felt compelled to make my mom's noodle pudding. He walked in with my mom's noodle pudding and all the food, and I felt that that was a true tribute to Grandma. I spent an exorbitant amount of time with my mom, not because she needed me, but because I wanted to be there. She always made me feel safe. For whatever reason, we brought out the calmness in each other. The other day, I was lying in her bed, sharing the same pillow and showing her the new Canasta Junction. I thought to myself, is this weird that I'm 62 years old and I actually still love laying in bed with my mom? She loved me fiercely. She loved our family fiercely. She would protect us and stand by us no matter what. I am who I am because of her. She always told me she lived a life full of love and happiness, no regrets, and she was ready to depart at any time. I wasn't ready for her to ever go, and selfishly, I kept telling her that. But when I was with her, holding her hand in her final moments, she still, even then, made me feel safe and made me feel calm. And I felt comfortable telling her, I am ready, and it's time for you to rest. I love you, Mom.
We now invite Marlene's grandchildren to come together and stand together as a full complement of grandchildren, and Jonathan will speak on behalf of all of them: Allie, Jonathan, Eli, Jessica, Andy, Lauren, and Danielle.
Well, isn't it just wonderful that we can all be here to honor Grandma today? When we started sharing notes and trading stories this morning, Lauren really hit the nail on the head. We were all so lucky to have so much time with Grandma. She saw and guided us through childhood, adolescence, into adulthood, while always being our biggest cheerleader. Funny thing about her was that you could call and tell her you had a glass of milk with lunch, or you won a Tony Award, and she'd be equally as excited to just connect. She was so incredibly diligent answering all of our calls. My mom and grandma would FaceTime almost every morning for breakfast. I can't even imagine the logistical nightmare of making that happen. We all know the steps. Call her on the house phone, schedule it for 5 minutes later, give her time to fire up the iPad. 2 or 3 failed attempts later, you finally get on the call and you stare into her chest and shoulders for 10 minutes of conversation. And one of Jessica's biggest takeaways from Graham is that she always was genuinely happy to receive from us whatever we were willing to give. However much time or attention, she was so grateful. She would call us consistently no matter how often we were the ones that picked up. She never gave up on maintaining close relationships with each and every one of us in our own unique way with her. And what an incredible quality that is. She could make all of us feel so loved by her in ways that were unique to each one of us. Grandma never needed anything more than what she had. Her family and friends truly made her feel fulfilled. She honestly believed that she had it all. Grandma just had such a positive spirit, always a half glass full kind of person. It was impossible not to catch the wave of her energy, not to mention she was genuinely hilarious. Her laugh was infectious, and she was very willing to laugh at her own jokes or often her own mistakes. She always had something to say and wanted her opinion to be heard, even when we weren't asking for it, specifically playing matchmaker for all of her grandkids. When I started speaking today, I used the word wonderful on purpose. Grandma always used to say how everything was wonderful. When she was sick and fighting cancer, she used to tell my mom that she loved going to chemo because it meant 6 hours alone in a room with them and they'd find ways to make it fun. Who enjoys chemotherapy? Only Grandma would say something like that. And even when times were hard or she wasn't feeling her best, it was never woe is me or this sucks. She'd just look at one of us and say, well, this isn't wonderful. And she would chuckle. Or she'd say, still think I look wonderful? Well, every memory we have with her truly is wonderful. Brings a smile to our face and more often than not, laughter as well. I just want to rattle off a few of those memories for nostalgia. Vivid memories of sitting in the basement on the ping pong table, watching slides. You could ask to see Susie Bush's 3-year-old birthday, and it would be on cue 3 minutes later. Climbing in the tree in her backyard, picking raspberries, watching her dance around, singing Bushel and a Peck. Shabbat dinners every Friday night, cranberry chicken. I never loved it. I feel like now's the time. But I loved her though. Her noodle pudding, which was noted, apricot squares and mandel bread, barely enough vegetables for each person to have just enough, and rubbing our feet as we'd watch Gigi or My Fair Lady with her. And I learned this morning that the girls actually liked doing that. I always wanted to be with Grandpa and watch Get Smart or Police Academy or something like that. But above all, I think we unanimously agree that what we are going to miss the most is stepping off the elevator at their building to go visit her and Grandpa and having Grandma poking out the door in the hallway before we could even get inside. Just so excited to see us and our kids and be with us. You know, it's hard explaining this stuff to little kids, and we've unfortunately had to do so a few times over the last couple years. And you know, I'm telling Hank a story last night before bed, and he kind of knows what's going on, but it's a work in progress. And he specifically asked for a story about me and Grandma from when I was little. And so I kind of told him this story of weaving together a lot of those memories that I just told you. And at the end, he asked, is Grandma in heaven with Grandma Diane and Grandma Marge, who's my dad's mom and Chris's grandmother? And I said, yeah, they're all together. And he said, oh, that sounds like fun. And I was like, well, it's not the most fun. And he's like, am I going to go to heaven? And I said, yeah, buddy, you're going to go to heaven one day. And he's like, no, I want to be on earth with you. I was like, I know, I'll be with you forever, but at some point, we're all going to be in heaven together. And he says, I get to see Grandma Marlene again in heaven? And I said, yeah, buddy, you get to see her in heaven. And that was the story he heard before he went to sleep. And it's pretty remarkable the way that kids grasp and what they learn and how they gravitated. All of our grandkids gravitated to grandma. Well, Eli said it beautifully when we were talking this morning. Now there are so many kids in the next generation. We're so lucky to have the beautiful, perfect memory of grandma and the example that she set to pass on the traditions and the values and the closeness of our family. She's our inspiration for carrying this on to the next generation. And the sadness of the loss is met with the joy and smiles of so many beautiful children. We love you, Grandma, and we'll miss you so much.
We'll next hear from Marlene's daughter, Susie.
My mother was a very special woman who was loved by everyone who knew her. She grew up in a very warm, loving, and close-knit family. She delighted in being surrounded by aunts, uncles, and cousins. Family was her joy. It was her core value that she instilled in all of us by example. We grew up attending Gordon family seders and Hanukkah parties, which as a child I always looked forward to. And even though the Gordon family events were so very near and dear to her heart, she always made sure the wine gatherings received equal footing. This was not a taught lesson. This is how my mom lived. This is who she was. Of course, she learned from the best. My Grandma Sylvia was a role model like no other. The love she bestowed on all of us was second to none. She was the personification of kindness, compassion, love, and goodness. It's no surprise that my mother and my Aunt Lois shared those same qualities. They were truly cut from the same cloth. L'adore vador. My mother had a gift for putting people at ease and making them feel comfortable. She could engage in conversation with anyone. My mom and dad gave Stuart, Julie, and me a strong sense of who we are in the world. Shabbat dinners were a given. They were warm, beautiful, and filled with love and laughter. Our friends and cousins were always welcome. Everyone looked forward to the game of bingo that followed at our Shabbat table. As kids, my mom and dad instilled in us the value of pitching in. We were all expected to help out when needed at Mars Juvenile Shop, our family business name for my mother. I have wonderful memories of closing the store on Christmas Eve and going out with my family for a special dinner afterwards. When I brought David home when I was 19, my parents welcomed him with open arms. If I loved him, then they did too. Long before we were married, David, who grew up in Miami, was intrigued by his girlfriend's Midwestern upbringing. He thought he'd like to join in, and on a cold winter day, he asked if he could light a fire in the fireplace. Well, this Miami boy had no idea what a flue was, and in no time, our entire house was filled with smoke. He was mortified, but my mom and dad just laughed it off and tried to help him to not feel uncomfortable. They were even as forgiving when he did it a second time. My mom and dad were very special in these quiet little gestures. And of course, everyone who knew my mom knew how much she loved to play, giggle, and have fun. She'd never miss a game of bridge or canasta. She was an avid reader, enthusiastic game player, and knitter. One year, she crocheted Afghans for each of her 7 young adult grandchildren. And about 10 years later, she even took up oil painting. My mom learned to play golf because my dad loved the game, and this was something that they could have fun doing together. My mother had a girlish side, and she loved getting silly. When my dad brought up the little blue button, an inside thing between the two of them that I never quite got, it always caused her to instantly break out into hysterical laughter, and her laugh was contagious. My mother was so proud of her entire family. She loved her children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren with all her heart. She had more than enough love for everyone. She adored her daughter-in-law, Debbie. She was her third daughter. And I can't thank Debbie enough for being such a wonderful daughter to my mother. She also loved David and Kenny like sons. Truly, they were both boys when they came into our family. All of her nieces, nephews, brother-in-laws, sister-in-laws all held special places in my mom's heart. She loved all of you. We were so fortunate that my parents had 2 homes for many years. Spending winters in Florida, they were present when Eli and Lauren were growing up. Very close bonds with my kids were formed over countless sporting and school events, dance recitals, Shabbat dinners, Sunday night barbecues, and seders. So many wonderful memories. Our entire family was so fortunate to be able to celebrate together at Lauren and Brian's wedding just before COVID shut the world down. We didn't know at the time just how lucky we were. Those are memories we'll all cherish. My mom was as loving and as special as a person can be. My respect for her is enormous. I could not be more proud of how strong and clear she was at the very end of her life. She handled it on her own terms, in her own way, with extraordinary courage. I'm truly grateful that my mother lived such a long and beautiful life, filled with love and joy. My parents had a strong marriage that lasted nearly 70 years. Their relationship was built on love and respect for one another. Stuart, Julie, and I could not have asked for better role models. I know I'm not alone when I say this. I will miss her with all of my heart, and I will love her forever.
We'll now hear from Marlene's daughter-in-law, Debbie.
Marlene, what can I say? You have been such a bonus to me for the past 45 years. I knew you'd be a great mother-in-law, but I had no idea what a wonderful and best friend and confidant you'd become. It didn't take long for me to grow to love and admire you. Your beautiful presence and essence never escaped me. You always made me feel so loved when I was around you. Mom, you had quite a few remarkable talents up your sleeve, but the one that stands out the most for me is the way you made us feel. You were always emphatic that all your children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren be treated equally. You never wanted to favor or leave anyone out. The beauty was, Mom, though you emphasized equality amongst us, when any of us would be with you one-on-one, you never would know that. You made all of us feel like we were the most important, special person in your world. The intensity of your love for family and friends was felt by each and every one of us. You are the most beautiful soul, and I only hope we can always make you as proud as we have always been of you. There is such a void in all our lives beyond comprehension. You will always be missed, but you will always be loved. I love you, Mom.
We'll finally hear from Marlene's son, Stuart.
Churchill said, "When you're going through hell, keep going." So I want to thank you all for accompanying us on today's journey. It's so comforting that we're not going it alone. A couple weeks ago, I was sitting in their kitchen, at their kitchen table with my mom and dad. It was just the 3 of us. I looked at you, Dad, and I looked at Mom, and I was overjoyed. It's hard to explain the feeling that my sisters and I share. We really lucked out. We totally hit the jackpot, basking in the love and learning from the examples you both modeled so eloquently for us. Sitting there at the table with the 2 of you, I just had to say, this is the good old days. You both looked incredulous. Dad, your golfing days are long over, and you're using a walker. 2 years ago, you were in a wheelchair, and you're doing tremendous, absolutely phenomenal. Mom was changing the batteries in her hearing aid, so you both reasonably wondered, how is this the good old days? So I tried to clarify by saying, doesn't sitting here, just the three of us, take you back to the good old days before Susie and Julie were born? And we lived in the apartment on Hollywood. Mom rolled her eyes and smiled. Of course it was a ridiculous comment. It wasn't the first crazy thing that ever came out of my mouth, but it was the last one I think my mom heard. Good parents wear lots of hats. You're as good as they come, Dad. And Mom most certainly was too. My mom was my biggest advocate, my biggest fan. She was a natural-born teacher, patient, loving, and kind. She helped me with my homework, encouraged me to read and to write, and taught me valuable lessons embodied in phrases like, actions speak louder than words, and to have a friend, you have to be a friend. She always read my articles, my ads, my lyrics, and listened to my songs. I read the books she gave me about Katharine Graham, Cavalier and Clay, and Einstein by Isaacson. And she read the books I gave her, like Palestinian Voices, My Promised Land, and so many others. I wasn't always easy, and maybe I was never easy, but fortunately for me, that was not a deal breaker for her. When I started my advertising business, she was my first employee. She drove from Highland Park to my apartment in the city to answer phones and help enable me to compete against the giant downtown ad agencies. She had one rule. She'd get there by 8 a.m. sharp, but if I was ever still in my pajamas or not ready to go, she wasn't coming back. I kept my end of the bargain, and so did she. There's so many wonderful things I could say about my mom. I could go on for hours. So to cut to the chase, the most valuable lessons my mom taught me have occurred to me over time through my observations of her graceful style, her wonderful attitude, her tactfulness, her intelligence, and her hopeful yet realistic outlook. And not coincidentally, all these attributes apply to you as well, Dad. One of the keys to my mom's amazing life, it seems to me, was her awe-inspiring ability to move forward and not get stuck in the mud or dwell on the past. She was utterly devastated when her beloved brother, my Uncle David, passed away at the age of 34. I know she thought about him every day, but never became melancholy. My mom loved golf and tennis. When her advancing years foreclosed those activities, she smoothly and energetically and enthusiastically transitioned into painting, knitting, jigsaw puzzles, and Wordle. She always found endless pleasure with her grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Throughout her life, my mom was blessed with incredible friendships. She loved her sister Lois most dearly. She felt great pride sharing an incredibly close and beautiful bond with my Aunt Lois. My mom was also tremendously grateful for the wonderfully enduring relationships she enjoyed with my aunts, Helen, Joan, Janie, Annette, and Frances. I'm going to miss my mom a lot because she gave me so much for which I will always be grateful. I love you, Mom. Thank you.
Parts of these remarks are from the family, and parts of these are my own thoughts. Marlene Wein was born on the south side of Chicago, October 7, 1932. She was the middle child of Alex and Sylvia Reiff. Marlene adored her parents, was very close to her older brother David, as well as her younger sister Lois, and this was an extremely close-knit family. Marlene's mother Sylvia had 4 brothers and 1 sister, and her father Al had 1 sister. And so Marlene grew up in a warm and loving family, cherishing the warmth and love of her grandma Bessie, uncles Ben, Sid, Will, and Lou, as well as her aunts Janet and Sarah. Her cousin Barbara was a very close childhood friend who remained close to Marlene throughout their lives. Her family moved to the north side when Marlene was in 7th grade. She was unhappy moving away from Barbara, Sandy, and other close friends. You see, friendship is just a recurring theme in her life. It really was with her from beginning to end. It was a staple from her earliest days, truly, until her last. Marlene attended Nettlehurst School after moving to the north side, and she skipped 2 half-grade semesters. She attended Senn High School, followed by the University of Wisconsin for a semester, before going to National Teachers College. Being a teacher was Marlene's chosen profession, and she was quite good at it. Growing up, Marlene loved spending summers at the Standard Club Stop 5 in Michigan City, a small resort owned by her father, Alex, and he was a lawyer who dabbled in real estate investments. In 1952, Marlene met Marvin Wein. They fell in love. They got engaged in December that year. They married the next year, May 31st, 1953. They were married for 69 years. For a brief time, Marlene worked as a full-time first-grade teacher, while Marvin started a children's wear business he named for her, and Mars Juvenile Shop was born. Later the next year, Stuart came into the world, followed 2 years later by Stephanie and then Julie. And life was good in their house on Briar Lane in Highland Park. It was a wonderful neighborhood, a beautiful place to raise children. And then, most sadly, as we heard, tragedy struck in 1964 when Marlene's older brother David died unexpectedly at only 34. Her world was rocked, never to be the same. She struggled for answers, and she grew even closer to David's wife Helen and their 3 small children. Marlene never recovered from that trauma, but for the sake of her family, she forced herself to smile. Somehow she found the strength within to go forward and developed an intense appreciation and understanding of life's fragility. Marlene learned to value the preciousness of every single moment, and she instilled that in her children. When her youngest child, Julie, was old enough to start school, Marlene became a substitute teacher, and she loved it. She also loved helping out at Mars Juvenile Shop during the busy Christmas season. Marlene enjoyed accompanying Marvin on buying trips to New York, where they saw many Broadway plays. They enjoyed them so much. When Stewart started Advantage Advertising in 1984, Marlene was eager to help out, as we heard. Marlene and Marvin both had strong work ethics that they instilled in each of their children. But once her grandchildren were born, she exhibited her own entrepreneurial spirit, buying and selling Discovery toys. They were educational products that were fun to play with. The inventory she kept in her basement provided hours of enjoyment for her and for her grandchildren. It was impossible to say whether Allie, Jonathan, Eli, Jessica, Andy, Lauren, or Danielle enjoyed playing with the toys more, or Marlene enjoyed administering the lessons of learning. The love Marlene had for her husband, 3 children, 7 grandchildren, and 7 great-grandchildren was unconditional, ever-present, and enormous. She was not afraid to get down on the floor, sitting for hours playing with her kids well into her 80s. Marlene made Shabbat dinner religiously every Friday night throughout her entire married life. It was a staple of the week. It was an anchor that would not be moved. And family and friends were always welcome. The more, the better. Last Friday night, which was her 90th birthday, Marlene was in the hospital, not feeling well at all. The only thing she verbalized that day was communicating her desire to make sure that Marvin had a nice Shabbat dinner. Marlene and Marvin had a beautiful marriage. Together they enjoyed a full, rich life. They were lucky enough to winter in Florida, enjoy golf together, and celebrate holidays with family and friends. Family and friends, another anchor of their lives. Marlene was loved by everyone, and she loved everyone in return. She truly had more friends than one could count. And that was her skill, her greatest asset. She knew how to be a good friend, to be present, to listen, to care. All of her family were also her friends. She was loved and admired by her entire family. She was a tremendous role model whose contributions to the well-being of her friends and family can never be understated. I think it's significant that today is Sukkot, the festival where we instinctively build a small, fragile hut and we fill it with friends and family. There's this instinct, this reflex to invite people to come over, to join us, to not to be alone, physically, in person. We also have the tradition of the Ushpizin, in which we invited the spirits of our ancestors and of our heroes from the past to symbolically join us in our sukkah. And for centuries, the list has been men. In more recent times, we have a list of female heroes and heroines, matriarchs, and the like. And one of them on every list is Miriam. And that's significant because that was Marlene's Hebrew name. And so these days, Jewish people all around the world, we invite Miriam into our sukkah, make her presence felt. I think that timing is really, really amazing. The sukkah, of course, is a fragile booth. It could blow over, it could collapse, but it can't be something permanent and sturdy. It represents the fragility that each of our lives takes, fragility that she understood far too well. And what she understood, and I think a key lesson of the sukkah, is that what's ultimately important is not four sturdy walls and a permanent roof. What's most important is who is inside, its people, its family, and its friends. And that was a theme of Marlene's life when she understood and celebrated and passed on to her family from generation to generation. Yehi Zichra Baruch, may her memory be a blessing. Amen. At this point, I invite you to please rise if you're able as I continue with the memorial prayer. As it is the time of Sukkot, we don't do the standard El Male, we do one memorial prayer beginning Aloha Slichot. Aloha Slichot, Chanun V'Rachum, Erech Hapayim of Chesed, Hamsecha V'Hesed, V'Hakavad Yesha, U'Nucha Nechanach, Tachat Kamchei Shechina, B'Malo Kedoshim U'Tehavim, Gezohar Harakim Asirim, Et Nishmat, Miriam Bat Yaakov, Shel Ha'hala Olamaha, Ana Ba Harachamim, Sochra L'Tova, Kol Zochiyatecha, V'Sikotecha, V'Soharim, Uftacha Sheresed V'Ora, Sherechem Orahanina, Beseter Knafeha, Hastireha, La'olamim, Uitzro B'Sohim Nishmata, Adonai Hu Nachalatach, V'Tanu P'Shram Amishkava, V'Namar, Amen. Aloha Slichot, God of forgiveness, you who are gracious and compassionate, patient and abundantly kind, grant infinite rest in your sheltering presence among the holy and pure to the soul of Miriam Bat Yaakov, Marlene Wein, who has gone to her eternal home. Merciful One, we ask that you remember all of the worthy and righteous deeds she performed. May our loved one find perfect peace in your eternal embrace. May her soul be bound up in the bond of life. May she rest in peace. And let us say, Amen.
Ladies and gentlemen, the interment service will continue at Memorial Park Cemetery, located at 9900 Grosse Point Road here in Skokie. The family will be observing Shiva. It will be a private family Shiva, and memorial contributions in her memory to your favorite charity would be appreciated. For those of you who are joining us online, that information is also on our website. For those of you who will be driving in the funeral procession to the cemetery, the procession will be forming in our parking lot. Please obtain an orange safety funeral sticker to place on the right-hand side of your windshield. Have your bright lights and hazard lights on at all times. For additional measures of safety, we will be providing many of the cars with a flag. Also, please note, we'll have a car in the back of the funeral procession to hopefully keep other cars from entering the procession. Please use your horn liberally as you're going through the intersections. Please do not speak or text on your cellular phone while driving to the cemetery. In the spring, at some undetermined time, there will be a public memorial honoring her life. Also, as a gentle reminder, please be sure if you left umbrellas in the lobby, please take them. It is still raining outside. This time, we invite everyone to rise and stand in place and invite the pallbearers to come forward as we escort the casket of Marlene Rita Wein from the chapel, along with her family and the rabbi. Grandchildren.